It was a crisp March evening in 2025, the kind where winter refuses to fully release its grip, leaving the air cold enough to make breath visible. The streets of Washington, D.C. were bustling, as always, filled with politicians, journalists, and tourists eager to catch a glimpse of the nation's power center. Barron Trump, now 18 and preparing to graduate from his prestigious private high school, had been out with a few friends, taking a break from his rigorous academic schedule. Towering over most at 6 feet 7 inches, his presence was hard to miss, but unlike the usual Trump persona often seen in headlines, Barron was more reserved, known for his quiet demeanor and thoughtful approach to life. As he walked toward his car, parked near a well-known cafe, something caught his eye. An older woman, sitting against the cold brick wall of an alleyway, wrapped in layers of tattered clothing. Her face, though weary and weathered, had a strange familiarity. He slowed his pace, staring at her, his mind racing. Then it hit him. "Ms. Calloway?" he whispered, half in disbelief. The woman looked up, her tired eyes widening. There was a flicker of recognition, followed by shame, as she averted her gaze. She was his former high school English teacher, Jennifer Calloway, a woman who had once stood in front of a packed classroom, eloquently teaching Shakespeare, Hemingway, and Fitzgerald. She was the one who had pushed him to appreciate literature beyond politics and business, making a lasting impact on him. What happened?" he asked, crouching beside her. Miss Calloway hesitated, then sighed. "Life happened, Barron." His heart clenched at her words. This woman had been a respected educator, yet here she was, homeless, abandoned by society. Something inside him stirred, an urgency, a responsibility. He couldn't just walk away. "Come with me," he said, standing up. She shook her head. "I can't." "Why not?" I don't want to be a burden. You were my teacher. You once told me that knowledge is the greatest wealth a person can have. You gave me that wealth. Let me help." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Barron knew that in this moment, he wasn't just Donald Trump's son. He was a young man with the power to change a life. And he was going to do just that. Barron helped Miss Calloway to her feet, noticing how frail she felt beneath the oversized coat she wore. She clung to a worn leather bag, her only possession, it seemed, as he guided her toward his sleek black SUV parked along the curb. The warmth of the car's heated seats made her sigh softly in relief. Barron climbed into the driver's seat, casting a concerned glance her way. "How long have you been out here?" he asked gently, careful not to sound too invasive. "Since January," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lost my apartment when the rent spiked. Tried to keep tutoring, but it wasn't enough. Once my savings dried up, well, you can guess the rest." Her words weighed heavy on him. Miss Calloway had been one of the most passionate and intelligent teachers at his school. How could someone like her, someone who had dedicated her life to educating others, be left with nothing? "Didn't anyone help?" he asked, trying to mask his frustration. She let out a weak chuckle. "Help? People look right through you when you're on the street. No one wants to believe this could happen to someone like them." Barron tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The injustice of it all gnawed at him. His father's name had always meant power, wealth, and privilege, but in this moment, those things seemed hollow if someone like Ms. Calloway could be forgotten. "You don't deserve this," he said quietly. Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "Life isn't about what we deserve, Barron. Sometimes things just fall apart." He shook his head. "Not this time. Not if I can help it." A few minutes later, they pulled up to the private entrance of the Trump family's Washington residence. Barron knew bringing her here was a bold move. His father's household was constantly under scrutiny, but he didn't care. This was more important. As the car came to a stop, Miss Calloway hesitated. "I can't stay here. Your father." "He won't mind," Barron interrupted firmly. "And even if he does, I'll handle it." He stepped out and walked around to open her door, extending a hand to help her. As she placed her trembling fingers in his, Barron felt a renewed sense of purpose. Once inside, the warmth of the mansion enveloped them. The grandeur of the Trump estate, gilded fixtures, marble floors, and priceless artwork stood in stark contrast to the reality she had faced on the streets. "I'll get you settled," Barron said, leading her to a guest suite. "You'll be safe here. I promise." Tears welled up in Ms. Calloway's eyes, but she quickly brushed them away. Thank you, she murmured. I don't know how to repay you. You already have, Barron said softly, recalling the lessons she had taught him. It's my turn now. As he closed the door to give her privacy, Barron's mind raced with plans. Helping her wasn't enough, he wanted to do more. Because if this could happen to someone like Ms. Calloway, how many others had been left behind? And what if he could change that? The next morning, Barron woke with a rare sense of urgency. Normally, his days were filled with AP classes, college applications, and the occasional public appearance with his father. But today was different. Today, he had a mission. Before heading to school, he checked on Ms. Calloway. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, a cup of tea in her hands, looking far more rested but still cautious. Did you sleep okay? He asked. She smiled faintly. Better than I have in months. Thank you, Barron. I mean it. He shrugged modestly. It's the least I can do. But this isn't where it ends. I want to help you get back on your feet. Her expression shifted to uncertainty. I don't want you to get in over your head. Your family. They have other priorities. Barron met her gaze, unwavering. Maybe, but I'm not my father. And this is personal to me. She didn't argue. Maybe she saw the resolve in his eyes. Maybe she understood that once a Trump decided to do something, there was no turning back. By the time he arrived at his school, Barron was already piecing together a plan. The problem wasn't just about Ms. Calloway. She was a symptom of a larger issue. Teachers, the very people responsible for shaping the next generation, were being undervalued and left behind. If it had happened to her, how many more were struggling in silence? That afternoon, instead of heading home right away, Barron stayed behind at the school's library. He combed through news articles, research papers, and financial reports. What he found was staggering. Over 4 million teachers in the United States were either living paycheck to paycheck or had left the profession entirely due to rising living costs. Even in wealthy districts, the pay gap was growing. It wasn't just a local problem, it was a national crisis. As he pored over the data, an idea began to take shape. What if he could create a program specifically aimed at helping teachers in crisis? Not a generic charity, but something sustainable, something that could provide emergency housing, financial aid, and long-term support. But he couldn't do it alone. Barron pulled out his phone and sent a message to someone he trusted, Ivanka Trump. Later that evening, his older sister arrived at the Trump estate. Despite her high-profile life as a businesswoman and former White House advisor, she always had a soft spot for Barron. She found him in the study, papers spread across a mahogany table. "All right, little brother," she said with a smile. "What's so important you needed me here in person?" Barron didn't waste time. He explained everything, from finding Ms. Calloway on the street to the alarming statistics he'd uncovered. Ivanka listened carefully, her expression growing more serious by the minute. When he finished, she leaned back in the chair, her mind clearly working through the details. "You're right," she said finally. "This isn't just a story. It's a scandal. Teachers are the backbone of our society, and if they can't survive, the system is broken." Barron's heart pounded. "So, will you help me?" Ivanka's lips curled into a smile. "Of course. But if we're going to do this, we do it big." They spent hours outlining their plan. Ivanka tapped into her vast network of corporate contacts while Barron envisioned the core structure of the initiative. By the time they were done, the framework for the Educator Rescue Fund was born. A multimillion-dollar charitable foundation that would offer emergency financial assistance, provide transitional housing, and advocate for better teacher salaries nationwide. But for Barron, the heart of the mission was still personal. "I want Ms. Calloway to be our first beneficiary," he insisted. Ivanka smiled proudly. "Consider it done." The following days passed in a blur. Barron balanced his schoolwork while working tirelessly with Ivanka to turn their vision into reality. Calls were made to real estate developers, philanthropic organizations, and even former members of the Trump administration who had a vested interest in education policy. What started as an idea quickly became a movement. The Educator Rescue Fund wasn't just another charity, it was a bold statement. Within a week, the fund had secured $10 million in initial donations thanks to the Trump family's connections and Barron's unrelenting determination. But for Barron, none of it would mean anything unless Ms. Calloway's life changed first. One afternoon, he returned home from school to find Ms. Calloway in the sunroom paging through a leather-bound copy of Pride and Prejudice, a book she had once assigned to him in sophomore year. The color had returned to her face and the haunted look in her eyes had faded. "You always did have a soft spot for Austin," Barron said, stepping inside. She chuckled softly. "Some things never change." He sat across from her, excitement bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out a sleek navy folder and handing it to her. With a curious glance, she opened it. Inside was a document outlining a fully furnished apartment prepaid for an entire year located in a quiet, safe neighborhood near a local community college. Alongside it was an official offer for a new job, Director of Literacy Outreach for the Educator Rescue Fund, a position with a six-figure salary and full benefits. Ms. Calloway's hands trembled as she took it all in. Her lips parted but no words came out. Finally she looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. This can't be real," she whispered. "It is," Barron assured her. "You don't ever have to worry about being on the streets again. You gave so much to your students, it's time someone gave back to you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you, Barron." He smiled warmly. "You already did years ago. Now you get to pay it forward." The media caught wind of the story soon after. Despite the Trump family's usual media skepticism, Barron agreed to a 60-minute interview. Seated beside Ms. Calloway, he told the world about the night he found her, how it changed his perspective, and why helping teachers was no longer an option, it was a necessity. "I realized that if someone like Ms. Calloway, someone brilliant and compassionate, could end up homeless, then the system is broken," Barron said during the interview. "And if you have the resources to make a difference, you should." The response was overwhelming. Within days, the Educator Rescue Fund's website crashed from an influx of traffic. Donations poured in from all corners of America, parents, former students, even celebrities who had been inspired by a teacher in their own lives. But for Barron, it wasn't just about raising money. He lobbied lawmakers, both Republicans and Democrats, urging them to pass legislation providing higher minimum salaries for teachers and emergency housing programs for educators in need. His ability to speak with both empathy and conviction won him unexpected bipartisan support. Through it all, Ms. Calloway stood proudly beside him. Once a forgotten figure on the streets, she was now the face of a national movement, one that was changing lives and restoring dignity to the people who shaped the nation's future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Washington skyline, Ms. Calloway found Barron in the garden, quietly reflecting. "You did it," she said softly, sitting beside him. He smiled but shook his head. "We did it. This was never just about me." She placed a hand on his. "I hope you know how proud your mother would be." Barron's chest tightened at the mention of Melania Trump, who had largely stepped out of the public eye in recent years. Though he rarely spoke of it, her influence, her kindness, and quiet strength had shaped much of who he was. "I think she'd want me to keep going," he said quietly. Ms. Calloway nodded. "Then you better not stop." And he didn't. By the time spring bloomed across Washington, D.C., the Educator Rescue Fund had become a national phenomenon. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story, the youngest Trump stepping out of his father's shadow, not with political ambition, but with a mission rooted in compassion. Barron's efforts inspired millions. Students and parents across the country shared their own stories of teachers who had changed their lives. Social media exploded with the hashtag #SaveOurTeachers, turning what began as one young man's act of kindness into a grassroots movement. But the true measure of success wasn't in the headlines, it was in the lives being transformed. By May 2025, the fund had provided emergency housing to over 500 displaced educators, distributed $15 million in grants to teachers facing financial hardship, partnered with corporate sponsors to offer free mental health services and legal aid for educators in crisis. And at the heart of it all was Ms. Calloway, now thriving in her new role as Director of Literacy Outreach. She spent her days developing community reading programs and supporting struggling teachers. Her passion for education, once dimmed by hardship, burned brighter than ever. One day, as the school year neared its end, Ms. Calloway visited Barron's graduation ceremony. He stood on the grand stage, dressed in a navy blue cap and gown, receiving a humanitarian award for his work with the Educator Rescue Fund. As he stepped down from the podium, she caught his eye and smiled. A quiet acknowledgement. A shared victory. Later that afternoon, they found a quiet corner at the reception. "You've done something extraordinary," Ms. Calloway said, pride glowing in her voice. Barron chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "I had a pretty great teacher, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning for you," she replied. She wasn't wrong. By the summer of 2025, Barron's efforts expanded beyond the Educator Rescue Fund. With Ivanka's guidance and bipartisan support, he successfully helped pass the Teacher Stability Act, a groundbreaking bill that guaranteed minimum national salaries for public educators and established a $100 million emergency relief fund for teachers facing housing insecurity. But when asked about it, Barron remained humble. "I'm not focused on the future right now," he told a reporter during a CNN town hall. "I'm focused on helping the people who helped me." His words resonated. Americans, regardless of political affiliations, rallied around his message. No one who dedicates their life to education should ever be left behind. In early August, on a quiet evening, Ms. Calloway invited Barron to visit her new home. The apartment was warm and filled with books, framed photos of former students, and fresh flowers on the kitchen counter. It was a world away from where he had found her that cold night in March. They sat on the balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance. "I still think about that night," Miss Calloway confessed. "If you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't seen me, I don't know where I'd be." Barron leaned back, thoughtful. "Maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe it was meant to happen." She smiled softly. "I think you're right. And because of you, so many others will have hope." A comfortable silence settled between them. In that moment, it wasn't about the Trump legacy or the media frenzy. It was about a simple truth. Kindness changes lives. As the stars stretched above them, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a story about a young man helping his former teacher. It was about a nation waking up to the value of its educators, and a promise that, because of Barron Trump, their voices would never be ignored again. And in that promise, millions found hope. Journalists speculated endlessly about his future. Was he destined for politics, like his father, or would he forge his own path?